Welcome to Struck by Science, a podcast of the Polish Academy of Sciences Center in Vienna.
So good afternoon. I would like to welcome you to our next podcast, Struck by Science, dedicated this year to the problems of European integration. My name is Piotr Szlanta. I'm historian and director of Scientific Center of the Polish Academy of Sciences in Vienna, and I'm very glad, very happy to welcome to you Professor Renata Mieńkowska-Norkiene, a political scientist, specialist in European integration and democracy studies. So I'm very glad that you are with us.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
Let me firstly introduce you to our here. Professor Renata Mieńkowska-Norkiene received her doctoral degree in political science in 2009. He did her habilitation in political science in 2018. She's an assistant professor at University of Warsaw, board member of the Scientific Committee Democratization in Comparative Perspective of the International Political Science Association since 2018. From 2010 till 2012, project manager, changing role of the presidency in the European Union after the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, founded by the National Science Center in Krakow, in Poland. Winner of many scholarship, among others, scholarship of the Minister of Science and Higher Education for outstanding young sciences for period 2011 to 2014. Since 2015, member of the program board of the International Civic Society Institute, expert for the Erasmus Plus program of the Foundation for the Development of the Education System, member of the Team Europe, about which institution I would like to hear a little bit more. Of her numerous publications, I would like to mention, for example, the political impact of the case law of the Court of Justice of the European Union, published in European Constitutional Law Review, and as I already know, Professor Mieńkowska-Norkiene published a book on the democracy of Poland in Poland in last year. Am I right?
Yeah, that's true. About democratic backsliding, well, now situation has slightly changed, so it's not that up to date anymore. But yeah,
okay,
it's a good
would like to add
historical
something to
material.
your to my presentation of your person.
It's too much anyway.
So one more, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to our podcast. Could you maybe start by telling us a little bit more about the institution where you work now? I'm curious what Team Europe is. What does
Yeah.
it do?
Thank you very much for this question, and thank you for the invitation. It's really an honor. Yes, this Team Europe Direct, it's actually recently probably the most important body which I belong to, due to the fact that we have been recently actually engaged ourselves as a set of experts in the field of the European Union to going around Poland and teaching people about the European Union, spreading information about it, and also, which is even more important probably, fighting with disinformation about the European Union, about what it is and what it's actually not. So what we do, we go to, I don't know, fire stations, we go to meetings with women, with farmers, all around Poland. Like I've been really to places which were inhabited by a few hundred people only, where we talk to youngsters, to adults, to people of different professions about the European Union. But we also get engaged into some activities, like recently, for example, we prepared a letter of support for the Georgian people fighting now in the streets for their possibility to join one day the European Union's group. So we really sort of solidarize with them in their fight now with the government that not only de-democratizes Georgia but also takes the people away from the European Union quite visibly and going obviously towards Kremlin. So within this network, we have been really sort of trying to show the European Union to the people in its real picture and not the one skewed by anti-European politicians
Okay, so I would
or
like to have two questions
propaganda.
related to that. The first is, what's the real interest of in European Union in the maybe not urban center of the Poland, but in the land far away from big cities? How many people go to meet with you and your patrons? And you mentioned also about this misinformation. What are the most important bad information? What are okay? What is the more important, the most common misunderstanding of European Union among the Polish citizens?
Yeah, also a very good question. Thank you for this one. Um, Indeed, in, let's say, the province, not in a negative sense, we don't see that much interest in the European Union on the one hand, because people have their very own needs and
Problems.
interests and problems, indeed. However, when they find out that the EU has some tools to support them, this interest immediately raises. Or when they find out that certain aspects of their everyday life are regulated or even have already been supported by the European Union, they suddenly start getting deeper into the topic and they really raise their interest in the European Union. So, what we have noticed is throughout this period of going to those people, we noticed that farmers are highly interested in the European Union. They sometimes are quite skeptical at the very beginning, and it was the case with the European Green Deal. But in particular, which we know had a bad reputation, and it has had a bad reputation recently. And this is answering your other question about what topics meet a lot of disinformation and misunderstanding. And the European Union's Green Deal is definitely one of those topics. So when we try to explain what it's all for and whom it's actually addressed towards, suddenly the interest raises, and what we see is a deep understanding of those people towards the actual purpose of what the Green Deal is, and understanding that it's not to, let's say, undermine their everyday business, but the opposite, to help them be more competitive on this market on which huge companies which deal with farming products actually dominate. But the European Green Deal basically tries to regulate them way more than tiny farming production, because like 99.7% of what the European Green Deal has been all about was pointed, or those restrictions which were related to the European Green Deal, they were pointed at large, well, huge, really, farming companies, which those regular farmers with a few hectares, or I don't know, even tens of hectares, do not follow under. So
Okay,
those
so
things, they are
Green Deal.
really, yeah.
Okay, is the
Another
first.
story is energy prices. Because we can separate different sources of disinformation, and also there is misinformation where we have some misunderstandings, like the European Green Deal, where people didn't actually or haven't actually understood properly what it is pointed at, and so on. But there is a deep, let's say, disinformation which originates basically in Kremlin, and it goes really widespread. Absolutely. We don't even imagine how widespread it is. We were recently in Brussels to get updated on what has been going on in the European Union recently, how the new European Commission will work, and so on, as Team Europe Direct members. And we found out that this disinformation is like enormous. It's incredible how much money Kremlin has put on this disinformation market and how this disinformation really works, how intense and how efficient it actually is. So we have those sources of disinformation, which are related, for example, with our relations with Ukraine, with what has been going on, and also this whole trade around the globe and the European Union's participation in all that. And also those regulating or regulative powers of the European Union. The EU has been called, Eurosayus, or regulating everything like, in China and so on, which is obviously not true because the EU has regulated lots of stuff, but it's actually there to protect the people, not the other way around, not to protect the countries from, I don't know, competition and so on. Like, we are really very efficient in the EU regarding protection of data, protection of, for example, youngsters and children from disinformation, from manipulation and so on. However, obviously, these regulations, they only enter into force. So it's not so easy now to evaluate to what extent they are efficient.
Okay, so I
However,
can
it's
assume.
really important.
Mhm. So I assume that the main channel of this the misinformation is internet. Am I right?
Yeah, this is the main channel indeed. I can tell you that there is a very famous scientist that deals with those regulative, let's say, powers of the European Union. It's Anu Bradford, and she published in Oxford. And her first book, it was The Brussels Effect, Why the European Union Rules the World. It was very famous, and it was basically about how the EU regulative powers, how they impact both the citizens of the EU but also the world, and how the world then copies those solutions from the European Union. But her recent book is about digital empires, and she points out that the European Union's perception of artificial intelligence and dealing with everything that goes around those digital aspects of our everyday functioning is very strongly values oriented. It's oriented towards the people, while the Chinese, it's oriented towards the economy and their, I would say, collective, which is basically politically understood, right? We speak about the party, and in the United States, it's basically business, 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 and nothing else. So if we take a look at that, we are in the most wonderful place in the world, in a sense that all this regulation that everyone who is skeptical towards the European Union likes underlining, and that functions widespreadly in this disinformation about the EU, inspired by Kremlin. This is actually something that we should deeply appreciate and not be afraid of. Of course, those questions, anti-Ukrainian, the problems with the European Union's, let's say, engagement also from security and potentially maybe also militarily. From the security point of view, I think this is also something that is underlined in this disinformation. And it goes from bots, from trolling, of course, from there are farms of bots which are also paid by Kremlin. But, those sources of disinformation sometimes appear to be the governments of some of the EU countries, like our previous government of Law and Justice. They had this huge campaign of disinformation about the European Union, which was this very famous light bulb with costs of energy, which was fully fake, speaking about who is responsible for high prices of energy. It wasn't the EU, of course, but it was presented as if it was the EU. So sometimes it's even the governments that spread this disinformation, and we have to be really aware of that as well, right? Not to speak about political parties, in particular populists, who really are interested in spreading disinformation about the EU, because the EU has tools to fight with those aspects of politics in the member states, which basically are related to breaking the EU law and EU values. So, of course, those parties that are anti-European, they basically are anti-European because they are aware of the fact that both the European Commission and the Court of Justice of the European Union might enforce, let's say, sticking to the EU law and sticking to democracy and the rule of law also to those parties, and they would obviously not like it. So there
Okay,
are
so
all
thank
those
you very much
populist parties that deal with it.
this information about the everyday activity of Team Euro Plus. So let's move to the main topic of our today talk. It's challenges to the European Union and European integration process. You mentioned already at least two of them. The first is misinformation. The other is the rise of the populism among the European societies. So there are number of challenges facing European Union that could be mentioned. Among others, economic slowdown, crisis of legitimacy, migration crisis, the unstable situation in Eastern and South Europe, so war in Ukraine, and it's obvious. The trade relation with United States, China, India, the upcoming presidency of Donald Trump. What did I leave out?
They are so multi-aspectual that actually they may cover also other things. But yeah, basically what you mentioned might be the most important aspects. This migration crisis I would call the most important if we speak about rise of populism, because migration is something that populists exploit a lot as a topic. And it is to some extent a problem, not as such, because let's be honest, I mean, Germany or France or other countries, they could absorb the number of migrants entering those countries. It's just that they don't know how to manage them, how to manage migration. They have made incredible number of mistakes regarding management of migration. Like this open door policy might have been even proper from the point of view of, I don't know, German economy, for example, but not only German, because we see it in Scandinavian countries, we see it in many European states that really need migrants because they get simply old and there's no labor force there. So migrants are expected. The problem is that parallelly, no instruments of managing migration appear that would efficiently not only deal with migration as such, but also explain to the people those changes that accompany this influx of migrants to specific countries of the EU. And populists, they use it. Not only AfD in Germany, not only Marine Le Pen and Rassemblement National in France, but we've seen it in so many countries in Scandinavia, in Austria, and so on and so forth. So I think that this migration crisis, and it will grow most probably because look what has been going on in Syria quite recently. I mean, there will be another influx, obviously. Look what has been going on regarding climate change. There are more and more countries where people basically start starving because of a lack of water. So they will move to Europe most probably because where else could they go? So if we take this into consideration, I think these two crises are somewhat connected. So populists, they get fueled by migration crisis, and migration crisis hasn't been properly managed. Of course, we have migration pact, which is a huge and proper step towards managing migration crisis. But at some point, we will have to agree whether we want it or not, probably on closing or fully closing external borders to the extent to which, let's say, any entrance to the European Union will be somehow observed and will be monitored by either national proper, of course, forces or by Frontex. So
Okay, but
it will
am I
happen.
right? So according to you, there is no migration crisis. It's a question of managing this number of migrants into Europe.
It's not that it's not there, of course, but I think that there is still some potential of absorption of migrants. Look, Poland has just managed to absorb 2 million Ukrainians. But now it's maybe 1 million. We don't know the actual
The
numbers
number, yeah.
yet. Yeah. However, we have absorbed those people, and so many of them just simply stayed. And if you take a look at Poland, I mean, if not Confederacja that mentions that all the time as a problem, we would probably not really even notice that there is a problem of Ukrainians in Poland. Actually, so many of them filled in the gaps in our labor market. So, I mean, it's always dependent on how you manage the question. On the other hand, of course, as a government within the European Union and obviously falling under those regulations which the EU has set up, we have to, in any country of the EU, we have to manage properly vis-a-vis the society, of course, of each country, the question of how we treat those migrants so that the citizens do not feel discriminated, but first and foremost, that they don't feel endangered and that they don't see a real impact on their security in particular. It means no criminal, let's say, criminality raised and all those rates of, criminal offenses and so on, crimes. This is very important because, when we hear populists saying, oh, there are no-go zones in Paris and Stockholm and
because
wherever.
it's not a question of criminality, but as well identity. I think that many of the Europeans feel dominated in their neighborhoods by the migrants with other value, other lifestyle, other religions, and maybe
Yeah,
it's just a question of the number.
yeah, exactly. Or
Too
a
many
question.
in a very short time. But I would like not to concentrate only on this
Mhm.
migrant
Yeah.
issue. And what about the crisis of legitimacy in European Union? Yeah, but many, for example, populists accuse that European Union is bureaucratic um, institution unable to solve a problem, consuming lots of money. There are uh, many bureaucrats very well paid in Luxembourg, Brussels, Frankfurt, and in another place where these institutions are. That these bureaucrats are derived from the everyday life of European citizens. And what's about that? About this lack of the, I don't know, the democratic legitimization?
Yeah, that's also a very good question because when you mentioned all these things, I would partly agree with all of them. Seriously. I mean, I've been here in Luxembourg for some time already, and I've been dealing with, in particular, with judges of the Court of Justice, with advocates general, but not only, of course, also with top officials of the EU. And I can tell you there is a certain level of separation from the real people. But it's not as high as it's presented by the populists, first of all, or Eurosceptics. Secondly, they painfully go down on earth, actually, quite commonly by the cases they deal with. So those cases are real cases like my husband, as an advocate general, for example, he gets cases of migrants as well. And he deals with people who get to Europe, for example, on those crazy boats, which shouldn't even be put on the water, actually. And they get here and then they are mistreated and so on. And, this shows the actual picture of how it looks. Probably it's the picture that is more real than the one which an average European has. So here they have a little bit broader picture, while not, or wider picture, while not a deeper one, maybe in those problems that really people of Europe have. So indeed, there is this certain separation. But on the other hand, I can tell you that, and the fact if they are well paid and so on, this is just how we imagine that. But at the end of the day, when you see the conditions, how they live and so on, believe me, it's way exaggerated that they earn so much and that they live, a way better life. It's not true. I mean, I can tell you honestly. However, what I can tell you about this Brussels, somewhere there, in the clouds, which is really separated from the people and knowing nothing, it's also not really true. when you take a look at what the European Commission does, for example, what the European Parliament does, what the Court of Justice does, they do deal with this broad picture of how to fight those tiny problems that average citizens meet on everyday basis. And if they try to improve someone's lives, it's exactly the citizens. If you take a look at, let's say, communication and I don't know, all those responsibilities of huge companies, they were imposed by the European Union's institutions. But at the end of the day, it's the citizens that are happy because of those changes. But if you take a look at the governments, they will tell you, oh, it's us who introduced the good things. It's the European Union to be blamed for all the bad stuff. So it's a matter of communication. And this is something that the European Union doesn't know how to deal with. And they don't have a good communication strategy. They don't have resources, and they don't have proper people to help them with, let's say, informing about what the EU does, what it doesn't. Moreover, the EU's administration is not really particularly large. If you think about what part of the budget goes to maintain all those Brussels, officials, it's not that much. In every member state, it goes in tens of times more actually that goes to the public administration than within the EU, which deals with 400 something million people. So it's not. However, so it's not an actual problem, but it's a problem of communication. Plus, this legitimacy, it can not only be put on the European Parliament, it has to be also way more transparent. So I think that Ursula von der Leyen has already brought the European Union a bit closer to the citizens because she had this, she's got 7 kids, she tried to somehow deal with all those everyday problems in her speeches. She wasn't that much, far away from everyday life of the Europeans. She made some statements which were actually really well adopted by the people. So it's not so bad after all. But still, this homework has to be done. And I think this is somewhat problematic. For example, when we talk about the challenges, we've gone through a huge challenge, which was Brexit.
Yeah,
And
I
Brexit,
would like to ask you about that.
yeah. So you see, Brexit used to be a huge problem, but what Brexit has become actually now is something totally opposite. Brexit is a great lesson what happens when you leave the EU and nothing good happens. When you take a look at the United Kingdom, people would love to come back to the European Union. But now it's a tiny bit too late, plus it's really complicated. So there is this regret, and honestly, now the same Poles, for example, who voted for Brexit, because there were so many Polish citizens being in the United Kingdom that voted for Brexit. Now they are shocked. They weren't aware. They hadn't been aware before making this decision about what might happen. And, Nigel Farage, the guy who was so much for Brexit, the main Brexiter, he enjoys, first of all, of course, citizenship of the EU because his wife is German, his kids can travel and so on. No problems at all. And this guy is still vastly supported. But basically, he admitted he lied, he cheated, and people still support him. So the problem is not that the EU is bad or that we have this populism only from politicians and the parties. It's also the problem of citizens that now they have become so polarized. And I think that this polarization is also one of the incredible aspects of the crisis of legitimacy and the crisis of the EU as such, that citizens are either for or con or against, and tertium non datur. And this is terrible because it means that there is no common sense left to deal with politics as simply a sphere in which we try to achieve a compromise.
Yeah,
This has gone.
and the politics turn out to be a battlefield in
Voila, exactly.
in that case. But I'm a little bit skeptical if European Union could do something about the polarization. It's, I think, the task for the
Yeah.
for
This
the
is the test for the
governments and
governance. But
society.
you know what? You asked me also about this whole legitimacy crisis. Here I see also one more problem, because bureaucracy, it's there. But first of all, when we manage more than 400 million people, plus when you have 27 member states with different interests, it's hard really to achieve an immediate consensus. A colleague of mine has sent me recently a short message where he wrote, in China, making a decision, it's 2 weeks. In the US, it's 2.5 a month. In the European Union, it's 2 years. And I
It's a question of the
replied,
compromise, as you mentioned. There are so many
exactly.
European countries with different interests, different political culture. Of course, I can understand that maybe for Portugal, the Russian treaty is not so imminent as for the
Well,
Baltic state, Finland.
to the Portuguese it is, but look at Hungary. It's not so far away from us. Look how we differ within the Visegrad group. Not to speak about countries where, yes, you are right. I mean, Luxembourg, for example, recently has opposed Ukraine's quick entry into NATO. And now Luxembourg has the lowest spending on security and safety. So it's one of those countries which Donald Trump would kick out of NATO, because Luxembourg has actually the lowest share of GDP to spendings onto military and security related purposes, which basically means that they shouldn't even open their mouth. But they not only open, but they also are against Ukraine's entry. So if you think about that, why is it the case? But when you see when you see all those interests, Russians are here, Russians invest here, they have the money here in the banks and so on. There is a Bank of China very present here. So, it's all really. But when you think about those officials here and how they try to deal with the problem, I can give you 100% certainty that they really try to convince them to stop thinking only about their very own interest and starting thinking about the overall European security. So I think that even Luxembourg will become convinced, but not only Luxembourg. So yes, you are right. These interests are absolutely diverse. But I answered to this short message of my colleague. And in Russia, it's probably 2 minutes. This is what I told him.
Yeah,
And
because it's dictatorship, first.
exactly. And he replied, you overestimate his secretary's possibilities of typing, into the computer. So, I mean, yeah, you can say the European Union is bureaucratic, everything lasts so long. But when you think about the most recent crisis, which is, I would say, the most important one from our Polish perspective, that's for sure, but I think, if honestly, from the now global perspective, it's obviously the war. So it's Russia's aggression and what Russia does to the whole region and actually to the world. Because, Russia has contributed strongly. I think the strongest contribution of Russia here is to this multipolarization of the world, which we thought had ended, but obviously it hasn't ended and Fukuyama wasn't right. What we know is that China, Russia, now they try to use this window of opportunity to push aside the West and conquer the West, actually, with the support or without support of Donald Trump, we'll see. But Trump is a threat. We don't know which direction exactly it will go, but since he's a populist and he's unpredictable, it's very hard to say what we can expect. And if we cannot say anything, we cannot get prepared. So our resilience is somewhat limited. But if we think about what Russia did, this is a huge threat because, look, they have just really done an incredibly cruel thing to Georgia. 80% of Georgian society is pro-European. If you think about what their governing party did, it went strongly, totally against their own citizens.
Sure,
No,
but somebody vote for the
exactly.
Georgian
But
future.
but no populist will tell you, you know what? I'll beat a leader of the opposition to to, lack of consciousness. I'll beat people in the streets. I'll stop our integration to the European Union. No, populists of all kinds and in all countries, they go to power by saying, we are different. We are against elites. We will give you full understanding. We are down to earth. We are not somewhere there. We are not bureaucratic. We'll make things simple. This is what they say. But actually, between the lines, the citizens should read, we will not provide you with anything, because if we give you such simple answers, it means we have no actual answers. And this is something that the citizens actually now a sort of naively ignore. And those mainstream parties, they don't know how to address the problem. They simply feel well too comfortable with what they've already had, and they don't know how to address new challenges. And this is the most serious problem. We also have been facing it in Poland. We have now democratic government. And so what if they are slow, inefficient, etc.? Although Israeli friends of mine who came to Poland actually to learn how to, it was before attack of Hamas and Hezbollah on Israel. But they came to Poland to learn from us, from civic society, how to, get rid of populists and introduce democracy. And we learned from them that, when you have the mainstream boring democratic governance that does not fulfill all our expectations, we should still respect it and stick to it, because it still may be worse. And this is what happened in Israel. They thought, okay, our government is somewhat, boring, and they don't fulfill all our expectations. So there was a new election, and we know how it ended, and we know what happened. So, we have to be very careful about populists of any kind.
So you mentioned about interesting feature of the politics. Politicians, government could be boring for many of us, because it's my observation for many years. So politics, it's a part of the entertainment.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
it's nice when politicians fight each other, accused of the worst thing of being a traitor or fascist, Nazi,
Mm,
communist, Levak,
yeah,
anarchy, and people like it. Some
yeah,
many
yeah.
many people like it, and politicians is always, and in last year, probably according to me at least, more linked with the emotion, and what would
Exactly. You're
not
fully
not
right.
help to solve real problem, but
And the EU is not about emotions, because how can you be about emotions if you have the European Commission, where you have portfolios, you have specialists, you have people who are trained in specific areas? Like, we talk to the people who are now responsible for the AI and for Digital Services
yeah,
Act
are
and implementation.
specialist
They
in
are specialists, so they cannot raise emotions among citizens, because they deal with
concrete
providing
problem.
the people exactly with, first of all, good services, responsible services, so that we are not invigilated, so that we are not fed with some kind of propaganda instead of truth and facts. But, we have boring journalists who ask actual questions about facts, and we don't like them. Because, no, what we like are movies on YouTube, which are full of, sorry for that, but they are full of crap. They are full of disinformation, misinformation, emotional expressions of whatever populist politicians. But there is nothing behind them. Maybe there is a short, simple message, but there is no solution behind. Think about any kind of populist politician speaking about a complicated system of taxes. You hear, okay, I'll give this example because this is from our yard, which is Confederacja. You hear, we will lower the taxes. There will be 2 cars in the garage, and hacienda outside of the city.
Everybody will
Fantastic.
healthy.
Yeah, and everybody, exactly. But of course, they have no idea how to do it. As citizens responsible and critically thinking, we should not only think about our very own interest, but we should think also about the interest of the community. If I'm an employee, I have to think about my employer as well. Because if he or she is not there, I'll be unemployed. So I'll have no food to eat and no house to live in. So this community aspect, it should be also taken into consideration. And Confederacja or whatever kind of populists, they do not touch upon this very tiny but really serious aspect. And therefore, mainstream parties, they don't know how to address this problem of presenting the community and individual interests as basically the same.
Mhm. So I would like maybe to move to other topic. I would like to go back to the European Union and to the problem of the leadership, because for many decades the engine of European Union was German-French tandem. Today, both of these states are facing serious internal structural crisis. This engine seems to be stuttering. So, are there any alternative leadership? Are there any countries that could take over the leadership of the union?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I I prefer Germany without a chancellor and without a lead than with the leadership of Olaf Scholz, if I may be honest. So it's maybe good that they have this kind of turmoil, but whether it will, end up in something constructive, that's a different story. With France, well, that's really a tricky question. But yes, there used to be this tandem, and now it's not there anymore for various reasons. Also for, let's say, differences between France and Germany as such. But this question. I'm not sure to what extent it was your intention, but it could point towards Poland actually, because we have a huge potential of overtaking, maybe not overtaking leadership. This sounds way too as something exaggerated, but we could strongly contribute to, let's say, putting important to us on the European agenda. And I think we could do it together with Scandinavian countries, with the Baltic states, and with lots of countries from Central and Eastern Europe, which are interested in neutralizing Russia or defeating it. Actually, that would be a dream, and telling other countries that it's really a thing or an opportunity, a window of opportunity that we could use as the European Union to get strengthened. Also, vis-a-vis the United States, we cannot ignore NATO, the opposite. We can't count on anything else than NATO at the moment, that's for sure. But NATO is so much more than that. We have Canada there, we have Turkey there, we have United Kingdom there. So we could use this opportunity to deal with those countries which think alike as well within NATO. And we could try to also build our very own um, defense and security policy based also upon some capacities. I also know from this meeting in Brussels that we have those capacities. They have already been mapped Europe wide. So we more or less know who produces which kinds of, I don't know, ammunition and equipment and so on. This is what the European Commission already knows. The question is how to coordinate proper production in different countries. Would we also know that it's taken out of a competition policy or public aid and so on and so forth, which is good because then we don't have to stick to all those really tight binding rules. And so if we really, as the countries, as the member states, if we feel that this is really serious, which means if Poland tries and efficiently convinces all other member states, even if Hungary or Slovakia go a different direction, but the serious countries, we could be the ones, together with the, as I said, Scandinavian countries that have a say in the European Union or the Baltic states, we could really try to point those discussions towards common defense security policy, and it could be efficient. So at the end of the day, we could build our own European capacities, not against NATO, but within NATO, and with a really strong cooperation with other NATO countries, even if the US would be a slightly or somewhat different speaking about those main aspects on the agenda. I don't think that Trump would really change the whole direction of actions. So I think that we also a little bit exaggerate speaking about what Donald Trump personally can do. Of course, he's dangerous, that's obvious. But I wouldn't say that he can just reverse everything. He cannot. So, it's also us who should somehow try to not to allow for it.
Okay, so if you already mentioned Donald Trump, could you please name the main threat related to this presidency in America? How this presidency, the policy of Donald Trump, his idea could in negative way affected the European Union?
First of all, he may impose certain economic restrictions on the European Union. Basically, he can impose taxes,
Taxes, okay.
of course, on incoming goods from the European Union. Secondly, he can obviously somehow, not particularly favorably to the European Union, navigate their exports of gas, oil, whatever America has that we need. Third point would be obviously the question of China and how America will act vis-a-vis China, and to what extent it will also impact the Russian question and the way we sort of would prefer that America acts towards Russia. Then, of course, the support to Ukraine. We are not sure what Trump will do with support towards Ukraine, whether he will withdraw it fully. Now it doesn't look so, but not because of Trump, but because of Putin, who does not feel huge enthusiasm to accept, let's say, this offer that's already on the table. So Trump hasn't even started his presidency yet, and he already introduced decisions which everyone are sort of accepted as existing, namely his proposal of, let's say, the peace, which it's, as it seems, at least, Russia has just dismissed. So we will see what will come next. If it is, let's say, a revenge of Donald Trump, and if he hits Russia, or the opposite, if he tries to even more convince Putin to be America's friend again and coming to business as usual. I do hope it will not be the last case, but we cannot be sure about that. But also Donald Trump, he can simply, for his personal reasons, for his personal preferences and so on, change really a lot in America's politics and policies, which can be harmful to the whole global order, which is a disorder now, way more than an order actually, but still, which can simply enable or provide those countries which are now in this axis of evil. Speaking about China, North Korea, well, China maybe, okay, this can be tricky, but North Korea, Iran, and obviously Russia, they may try to unite. They may always have supporters in South America who are very anti-US. That's obvious, and this can be really tricky and problematic for the European Union that will then be left alone. And so this is tricky as well. This unpredictability. Speaking about where the European Union should search for its alliances, I think that for the moment, the safest option for the European Union is searching for alliances in Japan, South Korea, Canada. So in this Western countries, Western democracies axis, where we could at least unite over certain main crucial aspects of conducting trade worldwide, not imposing any, sanctions on each other or taxes or whatever.
Yeah, but so
customs.
America couldn't be replaced, I think, but South Korea, Japan, or Australia.
It couldn't. You are right, but we don't know what the US will do. So at least what we can do now, until it's all
Yeah,
clearer,
we should look for the alternatives. Yeah,
we should try and obviously strengthen our own capacities. That's for sure. But look,
Yeah.
this is problematic because, even in Poland, look, the problem is the following. We have Kosiniak-Kamysz, who's a minister responsible for defense. We could have already launched building huge factories of ammunition, We haven't done it yet. Why? Because he's busy with internal party games.
No, maybe
I'm fed up.
it takes time, I think,
But
as well. You couldn't be.
it takes time, but it should have been launched. And then it could take time to prepare projects, whatever feasibility studies, blah, blah. But it hasn't been even launched yet. And I'm not saying it's his fault. I'm saying that it's exactly what has been going on everywhere in the European Union. Namely, the EU tries to coordinate certain things. It tries to send incentives to the countries to, launch already some strong activities to strengthen those capacities. And the countries are busy with internal political fights. Germany, France being examples, but also countries like Poland. We have gone back from the dark side of the force. But so what if we haven't strengthened the capacities which are crucial? We will spend a lot on military, so maybe we will replace our own capacities with something we will import, of course. But and we get also involved strongly with the US and with trading with the US, and other EU member states probably will do something similar, simply to, intertwine with Trump so that he doesn't want to get out so easily from Europe, which is also one of the concepts to deal with Trump in the future.
Okay, so you also mentioned many times in last few minutes Poland and different aspect of the Polish internal policy. And at the end of our talk, I would like to ask you about the Polish presidency. In 24 days, we are talking on November the 6th, 2024. Poland will regain for 6 months the presidency of European Council. What, according to
December the
your
6th. Mhm.
pardon me?
December the 6th, not
December, yeah,
November.
December, yeah,
Yeah,
sorry, December the 6th,
no
not
problem.
November, December the 6th.
Yeah.
So in less than 1 month, Poland will be in charge of the coordinating of European policy. What could we do? What should be the priorities of the Polish presidency just to strengthen the European Union and meet all of these challenges?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because there are some priorities that we already know. Obviously, security, safety, defense. This is for sure something that is absolutely a horizontal and crucial priority. And everything else that is related to that is basically related to that. Like, I even have a PhD candidate who told me that even those meetings for the youth, they are about security, safety, and defense. So even if this is the case, not anymore about culture, all this stuff, it's basically so strongly related to security. But if we look somewhat broader, it could be exactly this moment, when this window of opportunity that has just been opened for us, and the situation in France and in Germany has actually strengthened this, or opened it even wider, the window. We could really, really fight for becoming a leader and for putting on the agenda the most important aspect. But one would have to be really determined and strong. And I can tell you that I'm not sure if Donald Tusk could be that determined and strong, because I saw him recently at the summit with Viktor Orban, as close friends and so on. I realize it's not the same, when they shook their hands. But back then, and what will happen during the Polish presidency. But Klaus Johannes, he stood with his back towards Viktor Orban. So it was possible to show discontent with what Viktor Orban does, for example, and how he acts on the European scene. So the question is if Poland will be really able, and if Donald Tusk, because he will obviously be the main player here, if he will be able to strongly enough send all the messages that Poland wants to send about Polish security and about the European security, about Polish idea of security Europe-wide. That's the first thing. Secondly, if he really uses this opportunity to build up alliances with Scandinavian countries, with Baltic states, but also with Germany to be, We will see who will win the elections. It will probably exactly become clear during the Polish presidency. Same story with France. We will know it probably sooner. So whoever it is, Donald Tusk will also have to include, obviously, those countries into whatever kind of idea. And to be frank, to adjust this Polish agenda to what is possible, also taking into consideration the new reality. Plus, what I would suggest, I'm not sure if Donald Tusk will even hear us or think likewise, but I think he should use his really good relationship with Ursula von der Leyen, who has just become a really serious player. And I do really hope that she will not make stupid mistakes like she used to do. She used to make a few times, like, some kind of nepotism or corruption, political corruption, or like, tiny things like nominating some special envoy for SMEs or whatever. She should avoid all these kinds of activities so that it's all transparent, credible, and clear for the citizens of the European Union, because this is sine qua non condition. And honestly, I think that Donald Tusk is able to do that. The question is to what extent he will really, really be determined, and to what extent also he will not take into consideration the Polish internal situation. Because, we don't know yet, but the Polish presidential elections may really shadow a lot Polish presidency. As far as I'm concerned, Donald Tusk doesn't even spread too much information about the Polish presidency in the EU because he's afraid of how it may impact actually presidential elections.
In Poland.
And, in Poland, of course. And it can be, and again, the Polish European policy and foreign policy may be hostage to all those tiny party games within Poland, internally in domestic policy, which I would really not like to happen, because this can be lethal to the Polish presidency in the EU. And the Polish possibility to dictate anything and put anything serious on the agenda.
So it's not a positive picture which you draw, but still we need to be optimistic.
There is some hope. There is some hope.
And so at least I hope that the Polish presidency in Europe will put some solution to these challenges a little bit nearer to us and help you to solve this problem. And so the Polish presidency will be not hostage of the internal situation. So thank you very much, Professor, for being with us.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Interview, and hopefully, I hope at least we could host you in other podcasts maybe next year. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you.